The CEO laughed as Jamal stood drenched in mop water, humiliated in front of the entire office Christmas party. "Even the floors deserve better than you," he sneered, clinking his champagne glass. Cameras were rolling, but no one stopped him. Just then, Jamal spotted a familiar name on a discarded folder, one that made his blood run cold. Why was his mother's name on the company's classified scandal files? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The night air outside the towering Manhattan glass building was bitter cold, but inside, the lobby pulsed with heat, champagne and carefully curated holiday music. Gold ornaments glinted under the chandelier's opulent light. It was Christmas Eve, and for the executives of Wexley Financial Group, the party was in full swing. Waiters floated across the marble floor with trays of cocktails and truffle canapés, designer coats draped over velvet chairs, and laughter echoed loud and unfiltered from the mezzanine level. The wealth in that room wasn't just generational, it was smug, loud, and fully aware of its power. Below that glimmering celebration, pushing a mop under the very same marble tiles they sipped wine upon, was Jamal Horton, a 34-year-old black janitor who'd worked that building for 3 straight holiday seasons. He wore a faded gray uniform with his name embroidered in a patch, and his hands were cracked from bleach and soap. But he moved with quiet purpose, staying invisible, like he always did. The party wasn't his to witness, let alone enjoy. His shift started at 4 p.m. and wouldn't end until long after midnight, when the last heels clicked out the door and the champagne glasses had been drained dry. Jamal had learned the rhythm of this building well. Which hallways creaked, which guests always left lipstick stains on the mirrors, which partners laughed too hard after the second glass. He worked alone. He liked it that way. But this night would fracture that silent balance forever. As Jamal mopped near the executive lounge, a heavy glass door swung open behind him with a gust of perfume and noise. He didn't need to turn around to recognize the voice. It was Miss Garrison Slate, the founder and CEO of Wexley, known for his sharp suits, sharp tongue, and sharper ability to humiliate without ever raising his voice. He was white, mid-50s, and moved like the building was an extension of his ego. And tonight he was drunk, not the stumbling kind, but the arrogant, emboldened kind. "There he is," Garrison announced, raising his glass and motioning to Jamal like a stage prop. "The man of the hour." I was starting to wonder if the floors were going to clean themselves. A few nearby execs turned toward the noise. Jamal instinctively stepped back, hoping to fade away. But it was too late. Garrison stepped closer, still smiling that wide, controlled grin, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me," Garrison said, lowering his voice just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Do they let you celebrate Christmas back where you're from? Or is this your idea of a gift? Working while the rest of us evolve?" The laughter was immediate, dry, cruel, complicit. Jamal stood frozen, mop in hand, heart slamming in his chest. He looked up for just a second, and caught eyes with a young white associate, maybe in his 20s, who quickly looked away, pretending to find something interesting on his phone. "Don't worry, folks," Garrison continued, still performing. "We believe in diversity here. As long as it knows how to hold a mop and stay quiet." Someone actually clapped. A slow, ironic clap. It was meant to be funny. But nothing about Jamal's face said comedy. He stared straight ahead, trying to swallow the heat that crawled up his neck. There was no witty comeback he could offer, no HR to defend him. He had bills. He had a daughter sleeping in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. And this job, humiliating or not, put food on the table. The worst part wasn't even the words. It was the laughter. The way people chuckled, then went back to sipping their drinks like nothing happened. Like it was all just part of the party. Garrison gave him one final look and muttered, "Merry Christmas, champ," before turning back to his guests. The crowd dissipated slowly, leaving behind only faint echoes and sticky patches of spilled alcohol that Jamal now had to clean. He bent down, mopping the area where Garrison stood just moments earlier, and for the first time in a long while, his hands trembled. Above him, a sleek black security camera blinked red. A quiet click, then another. Jamal looked up. That light hadn't been on earlier. Someone was watching. Someone had seen it all. Not just the mockery, but the expressions on every executive's face, the silence of the ones who didn't laugh, and the gleeful cruelty of those who did. And that someone wasn't who Jamal expected. But as the laughter dies down, the security camera light blinks, and someone unexpected was watching. The echo of laughter from the executive floors, never truly faded. It only thinned, like smoke drifting downward through the vents. Jamal Horton pushed his mop along the service corridor that wrapped beneath the building's heart, a narrow passageway meant to keep labor unseen. Mud tracked in from designer boots, smeared the white tiles, each footprint a careless reminder of how easily people moved through spaces they never had to clean. Above him, champagne corks popped in celebration. Below that sound, Jamal counted strokes, steadying his breathing, trying to return his mind to the discipline that had always kept him safe. Keep your head down, do the work, leave nothing behind. But the humiliation from moments earlier refused to dissolve. It clung to him with the smell of bleach. He replayed Garrison Slate's voice against his will, the tone that pretended friendliness while carving something sharper underneath. Jamal had been called things before, subtle things, things wrapped in policy and humor, but tonight it felt deliberate, theatrical, public, the kind of cruelty that needed witnesses to breathe. He wondered briefly if the security camera had really been on, or if his anger had invented that detail as a comfort. Proof had a way of feeling imaginary, when you were used to being ignored. He reached the threshold beneath the executive staircase, where muddy prints pooled thickest. Jamal knelt, scrubbing by hand now, knowing the mop would only smear the grit. As he worked, the door at the top of the stairs opened again, spilling light and voices into the stairwell. This time, the laughter came with footsteps, measured, expensive, unhurried. Jamal did not look up. He recognized the cadence immediately. Garrison Slate was returning, flanked by two senior partners, whose names Jamal had seen on plaques and email headers but never heard spoken with consequence. Careful on the steps, one of them said, his voice slick with alcohol. Wouldn't want to slip and sue ourselves. Garrison chuckled. Relax. If anyone slips, we'll just blame the help. They descended a few steps, close enough that Jamal could see the polished leather of Garrison's shoes stop inches from his bucket. A pause followed, deliberate. Jamal felt it before he heard it. The expectation of attention. He straightened slowly, eyes lowered, the way he'd learned to do years ago in places where his presence was tolerated, but not welcomed. Well, look at this, Garrison said, feigning surprise. Still at it. That's what I admire. Work ethic. Some people are just born for it. One of the partners laughed. The other didn't. Silence pressed in, heavy and awkward. Jamal said nothing. He kept his hands folded around the rag, knuckles pale. Garrison leaned against the railing, studying him openly now, as if Jamal were an exhibit. You know, he continued, my grandfather used to say there's dignity in honest labor. Of course, he also believed people should stay in their lanes. Guess he was old-fashioned. The words hung there, thinly veiled, sharp enough to cut. Jamal felt the familiar choice present itself. Swallow it or respond, and risk everything. His chest tightened. He chose the only option he ever had. I'll finish this section and be out of your way, sir, Jamal said quietly. Garrison smiled, pleased. See? Polite too. That's refreshing. Then, with a glance to his companions, he added, you ever notice how they're always so grateful just to be here? The partner who hadn't laughed shifted uncomfortably. Garrison, maybe. Oh, come on, Garrison interrupted. It's Christmas Eve. We're all family here. He turned back to Jamal. You got family, right? Or is it just you and the mop tonight? The question landed like a shove. Jamal's jaw tightened. Images flashed through his mind. His daughter asleep on the couch, the small plastic tree they decorated with paper stars, the promise he'd made to be home by morning. He kept his voice steady. I have a family. Good, Garrison said lightly. Then you understand sacrifice. Some of us sacrifice time, others sacrifice ambition. That was when Jamal finally looked up. Not in defiance, just long enough to meet Garrison's eyes and register the certainty there. The man believed every word he said, believed that wealth conferred truth, believed that the world sorted itself naturally, with people like Jamal at the bottom. Grateful for scraps. Garrison caught the look and tilted his head. Something on your mind? Before Jamal could answer, a distant pop echoed above them, followed by applause. Another toast. Another bonus announced. The sound traveled down the stairwell, like a taunt. See? Garrison said, gesturing upward. Different floors. Different futures. Then he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. But don't worry. As long as you keep your head down, you'll always have a place here. The partner beside him cleared his throat. We should get back. Board's expecting you. Garrison straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. Of course. He took one last look at Jamal. his expression shifting from amused to something colder.
Merry Christmas.
As they turned to leave, Garrison paused mid-step, as if struck by an afterthought. He glanced back over his shoulder. "Oh, and Jamal, tell your mother I said hello." The names sliced through the air. Jamal's breath caught. His grip tightened on the rag until water dripped onto the tile. "My mother?" he asked before he could stop himself. Garrison's smile widened, slow and knowing. "That's right." He tapped the railing lightly. "She worked here once. Long time ago. Christmas party, if I remember correctly." The partners exchanged quick looks. One of them opened his mouth, then closed it again. Garrison waved them off. Ancient history. He looked back at Jamal, eyes gleaming. Funny how things come full circle. Then he turned and climbed the stairs, his footsteps fading into the noise and music above. Jamal stood there long after they were gone. The corridor suddenly too quiet. His heart pounded, not with anger now, but with something sharper. Recognition. He had never mentioned his mother to anyone in this building. He'd used a different last name on his application. He'd been careful, always careful. So how did Garrison know? Jamal's gaze drifted upward, past the stairs, past the glass walls, to the blinking red light of the security camera. It was still on.
And somewhere on another floor, a door had just closed on a secret that refused to stay buried. The boss storms off, but not before dropping a name that makes Jamal freeze. Jamal stood motionless in the corridor long after Garrison's slate and his entourage disappeared into the echo of clinking glasses and soft jazz. That name, his mother's name, hadn't been spoken inside these walls before. Not by him. Not by anyone. Not even on the application he submitted 3 years ago when desperation had pushed him to swallow pride and take this job. He had chosen anonymity over pride and visibility over resistance. But Garrison knew, and worse. He said it with a familiarity that chilled the blood in Jamal's veins.
The air around him felt tighter now, suffocating, as if the walls themselves had secrets. He finished mopping in silence, but his hands were no longer steady. Every inch of the building he once moved through with detached rhythm now felt charged with invisible eyes. He moved with caution now, not as a cleaner, but as a man who'd just been warned, subtly, but unmistakably. That floor might have been marble, but the message beneath it was concrete. "We know who you are. We've always known." Later that night, after the party began to thin and the last of the executives left with tipsy smiles and gift bags full of things they didn't need, Jamal retreated to the janitor's closet. It wasn't a room, it was a cell, barely wider than his shoulders, stacked with cleaning supplies, brooms, a rusted sink, and a flickering light bulb that painted the walls a sickly yellow. This was his sanctuary, his corner of the world. But tonight, even this place felt like it was hiding something from him. He sank onto the crate he used as a stool, his back against the wall, trying to breathe. Garrison's words were played like an echo stuck between his ears. "Tell your mother I said hello." He hadn't heard that name in a workplace since he was a teenager, watching her struggle under the same weight he now carried. His mother, Regina Horton, had once worked in office buildings just like this one, before one day she vanished from the system entirely. No goodbye, no severance, just gone. Jamal's eyes drifted toward the metal filing cabinet in the back corner, one that had always been locked. No one used it anymore, or so he thought. He'd asked about it once, months ago, when a new shift supervisor came in for orientation. The answer was vague, old HR junk from before the merger he'd never pushed. But tonight the drawer wasn't fully shut. It was subtle, barely a finger's width ajar, but that sliver was enough to send adrenaline spiking through Jamal's chest. He stared at it for a long moment. His instinct said walk away. His gut whispered something else. Check it. Now. With a hesitant hand he reached out, fingers curling around the cool metal handle. The drawer resisted slightly, then slid open with a soft creak that felt like it echoed too loud in the small room. Inside, rows of dusty manila folders sat untouched, labels faded and edges yellowed with age. Most were personnel files, dating back 2 decades, names he didn't recognize, departments long dissolved. But then he saw it, one folder, slightly thicker than the others. No label, just a deep crease down the center, as if it had been handled often, folded open, then hastily tucked away. Jamal pulled it out slowly, heart pounding harder with each second. He placed it on his lap and flipped the cover open. The first page was a formal incident report, typed official, with the Wexley Financial Group header from nearly 20 years ago. The date made his throat tighten. December 20. The day after Christmas, his eyes scanned the page. Employee misconduct. Unverified allegations. Termination without compensation. File sealed by executive order. The language was cold, clinical, designed to bury emotion under corporate jargon. But it was the next page that stole Jamal's breath. It was a scanned handwritten statement from an employee, detailing an inappropriate incident at the annual company holiday party, involving racial harassment and unwanted advances toward a junior black female staff member. The victim was listed as Regina Horton. Jamal's hands trembled now. His breath came shallow. He turned the page again. A confidentiality agreement. 2 signatures at the bottom. The first bold and confident in black ink, Garrison Slate. The second smaller, hesitant, slightly smudged, Regina Horton. Jamal felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. She had worked here, not just in some distant connection. She had been inside this building, and something had happened. Something bad enough to erase her from the company, from employment records, from legal follow-up, from every opportunity she might have had after that day, and worst of all, from the truth she never told her son. He stood suddenly, pacing the narrow space, gripping the folder like a lifeline. The pieces began to click into place. The tight-lipped silence she'd carried during her last years, the way she refused to answer questions about her jobs, the way she'd changed the subject every time Christmas rolled around. Jamal thought it was trauma from poverty, but now he saw the outlines of something far more deliberate: shame and erasure. And Garrison had remembered her. He hadn't just recognized her name. He wanted Jamal to know that he remembered, that he still had the power, that Jamal wasn't just some anonymous janitor with a mop. He was the son of the woman Garrison had once silenced, and who now worked beneath his feet, unknowingly beneath the very man who'd helped destroy her. The weight of it all threatened to collapse Jamal's knees. But beneath the rage and confusion, something else stirred: clarity. They had buried it, and they were still burying it. But the folder wasn't alone. Jamal reached back into the drawer, sifting quickly now. Behind the other files was a smaller envelope, unmarked but crisp. He pulled it out, opened it, and found a stack of old printed photographs, blurred, candid images taken at a holiday party. The same party. He flipped through them, breath catching on the 5th one. In it, his mother stood near a white tablecloth-covered bar, wearing a modest black dress. Her smile was tentative. Standing next to her was Garrison Slate, younger, thinner, but unmistakable. His hand rested on her lower back. She looked uncomfortable. Her shoulders were slightly pulled in. The next photo showed her alone, exiting what appeared to be a conference room, mascara smudged. The timestamp was minutes later. There were no more photos after that. Jamal sat down again, the photos laid out before him, a silent crime scene. He knew, deep in his bones, that whatever happened to his mother hadn't been just HR misconduct. It had been deliberate, covered, and she'd been forced to sign away her dignity for a paycheck she probably never received. His phone buzzed. Startled, he snatched it from his pocket. One new message. No contact. Just a single line. "You shouldn't have opened that." One signature on the page matches the boss's and another matches Jamal's mother's. Jamal sat frozen in the janitor's closet, his breath shallow, the envelope of photographs and documents trembling in his lap, as though the papers themselves were alive with the weight of what they held. The phone buzzed one last time, the chilling message still lit on the screen. "You shouldn't have opened that." The words sat like acid in his gut. Whoever sent it hadn't just guessed. They had been watching him. The second he discovered the file that shouldn't exist, someone had reached into the present to remind him exactly how deep the past still lived. That message wasn't a warning. It was a threat. He tucked the file beneath his jacket, pressing it close to his chest as he exited the small, dimly lit closet, and moved silently through the service hallway like a shadow. The buzz of the party upstairs had softened, but it still pulsed faintly through the ceiling. Muffled laughter, distant clinks of glass, a DJ playing holiday classics in a tone far too cheerful for what he'd just uncovered. The building no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a crime scene. Every wall, every polished tile, every glass panel might have been scrubbed clean on the surface. But Jamal now saw the stains that history had tried to erase. He didn't know what he was doing. Not exactly. But something inside him refused to stay silent. He had to push further, and he had to do it now, while the embers of the past were still burning in his hands. He took the stairs to the mezzanine level, careful not to draw attention. The party had thinned, but a handful of guests still lingered, sipping the last drops of overpriced wine, murmuring over stock forecasts, pretending they still belonged in a room too opulent for empathy. But Jamal wasn't looking for them. He was searching for the woman he'd seen earlier, white, mid-60s, understated elegance in her pearl gray dress. She hadn't laughed when Garrison humiliated him. She hadn't looked away. She'd watched, not with cruelty, but with memory. She stood near the bar now, tracing the rim of her glass absent-mindedly. Her face had that quiet, tired look of someone who carried history inside her, but had long stopped speaking it aloud. Jamal pushed a service cart near her, feigning a cleaning task. His voice came out low, steady, and purposeful. "Long night," he said, keeping his eyes on the glass he was pretending to polish. She glanced sideways, her tone calm but weighed down. "It always is. Some traditions never change." He waited a beat. Then, softly, "You've been coming to these for a while?" She took a slow sip, her voice slightly firmer. "Since before Garrison wore suits tailored in Italy, back when this place still had its soul or pretended to." He exhaled through his nose, just loud enough. "Then maybe you remember Regina Horton." The woman's hand froze. Her glass hovered midair, and for a split second, her eyes widened. She set the drink down gently, turning toward him fully now. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, her voice no longer casual. Jamal met her gaze. "I'm her son." Her lips parted in a soundless breath. Her expression broke into something between horror and sorrow. She scanned the room, then gestured slightly. "Not here. Walk with me." Without another word, she led him through a side corridor, past the remnants of half-drunk cocktails, and faux garlands into a quiet office wing. The moment the door closed behind them, her facade cracked. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling. "I didn't know she had a child. We all just assumed she left. After what they did to her, she didn't come back. She didn't collect her things, and no one, not one of us, had the courage to ask questions." Jamal's throat tightened. "What happened?" She hesitated, swallowed hard. "Your mother was brilliant. She wasn't just a worker. She was respected, by some. But Garrison, he singled her out. Always with compliments that felt too personal. Comments that made her shrink. Then came the party. Christmas Eve, she reported something that happened between them. Nobody told us the full story, only that she accused him, and he denied it. But the next day, she was gone. Fired. No hearing, no HR investigation, no warning. And those of us who asked were told to shut our mouths if we wanted to keep our jobs." Jamal could feel his heart breaking in real time. "She signed a confidentiality agreement." The woman nodded, tears beginning to form. "I know. I saw the paper. Her name was on it. They threatened her. Said she'd never work in this city again. They erased her like she was a smudge on glass. They knew no one would speak up, especially not for a black woman." His jaw clenched, voice cracking. "She was pregnant." The woman's face drained of color. "I didn't know that. But she did say she needed medical leave. They told her no. Said she hadn't earned it yet." Jamal turned away for a moment, struggling to stay composed. "That child she was carrying, that was me." She pressed a hand to her chest. "God, I'm so sorry." He looked at her, voice trembling. "You were there. You saw it happen. I didn't see the incident. But I saw her afterward. In the break room. She was crying. And I saw Garrison walk out of the conference room smiling like nothing happened. I saw the way he looked at her, like she was disposable." She walked to her desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a plain envelope. "This arrived for me last week. No return address. Just this photo inside." Jamal opened it slowly. Inside was a photo of his mother. The same party. The same black dress. But this time, her body language was clear. Garrison wasn't just standing beside her. He was gripping her wrist tightly, her face twisted in visible discomfort. And beside them stood another man, watching quietly. Jamal recognized the face instantly. It was the man who shook Garrison's hand tonight. Earlier during the party. The one in the charcoal suit with the unnerving smile. Not an executive. Not security. Someone else entirely. "He was there that night?" Jamal asked, his voice low. The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, back then he was head of legal. Now he's something else." Jamal stared at the photo. And then suddenly, it all clicked. The message, the envelope, the silence. The person who sent this photo didn't want revenge. They wanted help. And that man in the charcoal suit, he was still here. A guest at tonight's party, accidentally reveals they were there when it happened. The office was a different world once the lights dimmed, and the noise faded. By 1:30 a.m., Wexley Financial Group had emptied, leaving behind only the aftertaste of luxury and secrets. Desks sat untouched like shrines to ego. Bottles of wine lay half-consumed, and crystal glasses glittered under ambient lighting like nothing ugly had ever happened between those walls. Yet Jamal Horton knew better now. Every polished surface was a lie. Every glass reflection hid something darker. He moved like a shadow through the hallways, mop in hand, cart trailing behind him, but his mind wasn't on the floors. It was on the photo, the signature, the envelope. The woman in gray who'd risked just enough to point him toward a truth everyone else seemed desperate to bury. And the man in the charcoal suit, the one in the background of the photo, the one who had silently watched as Garrison Slate broke a woman's career, was still in the building. That detail churned in Jamal's gut, like acid. The executive suite on the 31st floor was supposed to be unoccupied tonight. Lights off, doors locked. But as he approached, he noticed something strange. One of the side doors stood slightly ajar, not wide enough to be obvious, but enough for someone watching closely to notice. He paused mid-step, heart slowing as his instincts sharpened. If someone was still here at this hour, it wasn't for spreadsheets or Christmas bonuses. He kept his movements casual, reaching for the mop handle and gliding it over the marble tile with practiced rhythm, letting his ears lead the way. As he neared the suite, he could hear it. A voice, low and precise, speaking into what sounded like a secure line. The door muffled most of it, but a few words carried. It's not just the photos. We're hearing someone accessed the sealed personnel archives. Jamal's blood froze. He turned slightly, leaning closer to the door without touching it. His breath shallow, heart hammering behind his ribs. This could trigger the board again. We can't let it happen like it did in 2005. Not with everything coming down next quarter. A pause. Then the voice dropped lower, sharper, more urgent. I don't care how. Contain it. I want the situation handled tonight, before it spreads. Another voice responded, this one more distant, through the phone. Who's the source? Silence. Then Jamal Horton. Jamal flinched. His own name dropped like a code word. A problem to be solved. He's digging. Found something he wasn't supposed to. Don't know how far he's gotten, but if he links Regina back to Garrison, it's over. There was a pause. Papers shuffled. No, don't fire him. Not yet. That's too loud. We need something quieter. Discredit him. Make it look like misconduct. Drug use. Theft. Maybe something off camera. Get the union involved. If you have to. But don't leave fingerprints. Jamal stepped back from the door, the mop shaking in his hand. The tile beneath his feet felt less like flooring and more like a trapdoor. He had known the file was dangerous. He had felt the risk in every step since finding it. But hearing his name spoken like a target confirmed what he hadn't wanted to believe. This wasn't just about a buried scandal. It was about the system's reflex to protect itself at all costs. The man in the room continued, now pacing audibly. We can't afford a repeat of Regina. The damage was bad enough then. She was one voice, and we shut it down. But her son, a black man with a camera phone and sympathy? He's a headline waiting to happen. The phone crackled again. And the envelope? The photos? Gone. Or they will be. He won't have time to use them. Jamal stepped away slowly, his mind racing. Someone was trying to erase him just like they erased his mother. Not through violence, not with a weapon, but through erasure. The same tools they'd always used on people like him. Discredit. Disappear. Deny. That was how racism looked in glass towers. It wasn't in slurs or shouted threats. It was polished, planned, whispered behind closed doors, and dressed up as policy. He slipped around the corner and ducked into a nearby conference room, his breath ragged, trying to think. He needed proof. Something to record that call. Something to connect the conspiracy directly to Garrison's circle. But his phone, the one he used earlier, was almost dead. 1 bar left. And no service on this floor. Then he remembered the custodial locker on 28. A tucked-away corner, with a live Ethernet port, and an old phone line. He had used it once to call his daughter when his phone died on shift. If he could get there, record what he'd just heard, and back up the documents, he might have a chance. Jamal moved fast, pushing the cart as cover, descending the stairwell, rather than risk the elevator. Every flight down felt like a heartbeat, the kind of urgency that makes men run without being chased. The 28th floor was dark, but the lights flicked on with motion as he entered the custodial bay. The small room smelled like bleach and linoleum wax, but it held exactly what he needed: a wired phone with a record function, and an old office laptop connected to the internal network. He slid the envelope onto the desk, opened the laptop and plugged in the photos. He began uploading, slowly, carefully, to a personal cloud he had set up for his daughter's schoolwork. It was the only cloud account not tied to his name. As the files began transferring, he heard a sound behind him. Not loud, just the soft click of a door handle. Jamal turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was the man in the charcoal suit. Not Garrison, but someone older, cleaner, more dangerous. The man smiled without warmth. "Working late, Mr. Horton." Jamal straightened, shielding the laptop slightly with his body. "Always do, sir." The man stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You know, I used to respect that about your mother too. Her discipline, her silence." He walked closer. But silence can be taught, even inherited, or removed. Jamal's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Not to fight, but to hold steady. You were there that night, weren't you?" The man's eyes didn't flinch. "I was." He looked down at the envelope. "You weren't supposed to see that." Jamal stepped between him and the desk. "You buried her." "No," the man said, voice like glass. "She buried herself. All we did was close the lid." Then his eyes narrowed. "But you've pried it open, and now you're dripping blood all over the carpet." Before Jamal could respond, the lights in the room flickered, then went out entirely. The voice on the call says his name, and that he needs to be handled. The lights in the custodial room flickered back to life, as suddenly as they had vanished, casting a dim, sterile glow across the narrow space. But the man in the charcoal suit was already gone. Not a trace left behind. No sound of footsteps. No closing door. As if he'd never been there at all. But Jamal knew better. That voice, that smug calm, that haunting phrase, "You've pried it open." It wasn't a hallucination. It was a threat delivered with the confidence of someone who'd delivered them before, and always made good on them. Jamal didn't wait to exhale. He unplugged the laptop, shoved the envelope back into his jacket, and grabbed the flash drive still hot from the upload. He had what he needed, for now, but time was no longer on his side. If they knew he was digging, and if someone inside the building could shut off the lights without a word, then they also had eyes on every move he made. He needed to get out. But before anything else, he needed answers, the kind no file could give. A name had come up once, years ago, whispered like a ghost in the employee break room, back when he first started. Inez Washington, a long-retired facility supervisor who had worked for Wexley in the late 90s and early 2000s. Some said she'd been fired. Others claimed she'd retired early due to stress. But what stuck with Jamal was what one former custodian said in passing: "If you want to know what this place really is, find Inez." It was a long shot, but desperation rewrites what's possible. Jamal did what he never did, logged into one of the executive terminals during his next shift, and searched her name. After 30 minutes of dead ends, buried directories, and restricted HR logs, he found a last known address listed under a vendor contact profile from 2004, marked inactive. It was in Queens. A residential home. No phone number. No email. Just a line that read, "Do not contact." That alone told him everything he needed to know. By the following evening, Jamal was standing outside a modest brownstone in South Jamaica. The paint on the gate was chipped, the garden slightly overgrown, but the home had a kind of quiet dignity, like it had stood through decades without apology. He adjusted his jacket, still stained slightly from bleach, and stepped up to the door, the envelope of documents pressed close to his side. When he rang the bell, there was no answer at first, just the faint sound of a TV playing inside. He was about to leave when the curtain shifted slightly and a pair of eyes peered through the gap. "I'm not buying anything," came a sharp, tired voice from inside. "I'm not selling," Jamal replied, voice steady but respectful. "I just need to talk. Please. It's about Wexley." A pause. Then the door opened, slowly, cautiously. Inez Washington stood there, in her early 70s now, with silver strands braided neatly, a worn cardigan draped over her shoulders, and eyes that had seen too much. Her face was lined with the kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books but from battles survived in silence. "I knew someone would come one day," she muttered, stepping aside. "Didn't think it'd be you." Jamal blinked. "You know who I am?" "I know your mother," she said, without looking at him. "Knew her. Regina had eyes like yours, fire behind them. Not many folks ever noticed that fire, they just saw her skin and decided who she was before she ever opened her mouth. He stepped inside, heart pounding. The house smelled of old books and time. A low hum came from a heater in the corner. The TV was paused on a black and white movie. Inez motioned toward a chair without speaking, then slowly lowered herself into her recliner. "You're here 'cause you found something," she said. "I can see it on your face." Jamal nodded. A file from the 2005 Christmas party, and a photo. Her, with Garrison Slate, and someone else. It wasn't just harassment. It was a pattern. Inez cut in. Her voice was sharp now, her eyes alive with anger. "It wasn't just your mother. It was what they did to every black woman in that building who rose too fast or spoke too loud. They made examples out of us. Quietly, politely, with HR letters and legal terms that meant the same thing as chains." Jamal leaned forward, his throat tightening. Why didn't anyone say anything? Inez's laugh was bitter, small. Because silence was survival. We had families, mortgages. They knew that. That's how racism works in those places. Not with burning crosses, but with cold meetings and paper trails you can't trace. They never touched me, not like Regina, but they stripped me down all the same. I trained 3 managers who got promoted over me. Sat in meetings where they said diversity like it was a dirty word. Every time I brought up bias or unequal treatment, they called me angry. You ever been called angry, Miss Orton, when all you did was tell the truth? Jamal nodded slowly. I have. I stayed longer than I should have, she whispered. Thought maybe if I kept my head down, I could change it from inside. But systems like Wexley don't change. They adapt. They go underground. White gloves on the outside, blood on the inside. She stood slowly and walked to a shelf, pulling down a small wooden box. She brought it back and sat it on the table between them. Jamal watched as she opened it. Inside were photos, letters, and a small sealed envelope tied with a ribbon that had yellowed over time. I kept this, Inez said, her voice softer now. Because Regina asked me to. She handed it to me the night she left. Said, give this to my son one day, if he ever comes looking, but only if he's ready to know everything. Jamal stared at the envelope, his throat dry. You never opened it. It wasn't mine to open, she said, and I didn't think you'd ever come. He reached out, hands trembling slightly, and took the envelope. On the back, in handwriting he hadn't seen in years, were the words to Jamal. When it's time. What's in it? He asked quietly. Inez looked at him, her eyes heavy with memory. Proof. Names. Letters she wrote, but never sent. And something else. Something that scared even me. When I read the first page. Jamal's pulse quickened. What? Inez leaned in. A list of people who helped cover it up, including someone running for state office next year. His heart dropped. They'll come after you if you open that, she warned. They came after her in ways you don't know. Not just firing her. They followed her. Ruined job interviews. Blackballed her. She used burner phones just to call her sister. It broke her. Jamal stared at the envelope, his breath thick. Everything in him screamed to tear it open. But Inez stopped him with a hand on his arm. Only open it, she said, her voice low. If you're ready to risk everything. Your job. Your name. Maybe your life. That's the price of truth. Jamal looked into her eyes. The quiet strength. The years of silence now breaking open. And nodded once. I've already lost too much to stop now. But as he tucked the envelope into his jacket, the heater flickered, and the power in the house cut out completely. She gives him a sealed envelope and tells him, open it only if you're ready to risk everything. The silence that filled Inez's house after the power went out wasn't just electrical, it was psychological. A stillness too precise, too perfectly timed. Jamal didn't need confirmation. He could feel it in his bones. This wasn't just a neighborhood outage. This was a message. Inez didn't flinch. She simply turned her head toward the window, her breath slow and steady, and muttered as if she'd been waiting for it all along. They cut the grid. They know you came here. Outside, the dark street now hosted a black sedan, idle and unlit, parked across the road like a silent witness. No movement, no identifiers, just presence, and that was louder than any siren. Jamal's fingers tightened over the envelope in his jacket pocket. He didn't need any more sign. The line had been crossed. He stood to leave, and Inez pointed him to the back door through the alley. They're not just watching you anymore, she warned. Jamal nodded once, and slipped into the shadow. The city swallowed him again, faceless, buzzing, indifferent. But everything looked different now. Every intersection felt surveilled, every stranger suspect. Still, he moved. Quiet, fast, calculated. He took the subway in from Queens and arrived at Wexley Tower through the loading dock beneath the building, blending into the gray of his uniform like muscle memory. Inside, the staff lounge murmured with routine activity, but Jamal barely heard it. He moved on instinct now, fueled not by duty, but by fire. He knew what he had to do. The footage from the Christmas Eve party still lived somewhere inside this building, on one of the internal backup servers inside the executive suite server room. It was rarely accessed, protected by gatekeeping no one questioned. But Jamal wasn't looking for permission tonight. He prepped his cart like normal, cleaning supplies on top, garbage bags underneath, the envelope taped to the underside of the cart's lid for safety. Then he badged into the elevator with a coded janitorial override, one of the few perks of invisibility. They trusted no one to matter enough to check. As the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, he rolled the cart in, his reflection warping across the mirrored chrome interior. He pressed the button for floor 31, the floor where the tower's power was curated, decisions were made, and legacies like his mother's were erased. The elevator started its rise, classical music humming faintly from the overhead speaker, too calm for a man carrying truth in his coat pocket. As the elevator climbed past the 17th floor, the overhead lights flickered once. He blinked, shook it off. Then again at 21, longer this time, unease slithered down his spine. By the 25th floor, the wheels of the cart caught slightly on the seam of the floor panel. He reached to adjust it, but then everything stopped. No ding, no slow glide to a halt. The elevator just froze, stalled mid-air. The silence that followed was not ordinary. The lights died, the buttons dimmed. Not a sound except the sudden rush of his own heartbeat. He hit the panel. Door open. Nothing. Emergency. Still nothing. Then a crackle hissed through the elevator speaker. The voice that followed was calm. Surgical. You should have stayed quiet, kid. Jamal's breath caught. It wasn't Garrison. But the tone carried the same air of entitlement. Someone high up. Someone who thought he was untouchable. The voice kept going, laced with cold amusement. You think you're the first to dig into this? We've buried better men for less. Jamal stared at the darkened panel, listening. His name hadn't just put him on a watch list. It had flipped a switch. They weren't trying to intimidate him anymore. They were isolating him. You really think this is going to end the way you want? The voice continued. You're just a janitor with an attitude. Your mother was smarter. She learned to shut up. You think you're better than her? Jamal stood tall, breath trembling but steady. No, he said into the darkness. I'm because of her. Silence stretched again. Then a quiet chuckle slithered through the speaker. Not for long. The intercom clicked off. Then, without warning, one of the ceiling panels snapped open. A dull red light flickered above as a pair of black boots appeared, dangling halfway into the shaft. Someone was entering from the top, silently, like this was rehearsed. Jamal backed against the elevator wall, eyes wide. Whoever was descending into the cab wasn't there to talk. But before the boots could fully drop into view, the elevator jerked violently. A mechanical grind snapped through the air, and the cab began moving again. Only now it wasn't rising. It was descending, fast. The boots vanished back up. The panel slammed shut. As Jamal gripped the cart to steady himself, the speaker flared up again. The same voice, colder now, delivered the final words. Change of plans. You're coming to us. Jamal glanced at the panel. Floor 15, then 9, then 4. It passed the lobby, kept going, into the basement levels. But not just B1, where maintenance was logged. The screen flashed B2. There was no B2 listed on any map. Not in any janitor manual. Not on the digital schematic. It wasn't supposed to exist. But Jamal had learned enough over the past 48 hours to know one thing for certain. Everything that mattered most was hidden. His breath stayed shallow. His mind raced. If they had a floor below ground that didn't officially exist, then that was where the worst parts of this company's legacy were kept. Not just files, people, records, dirty truths too ugly to store where light could touch them. The cart rattled as the elevator sped downward. He checked under the lid again. The envelope was still there. The letters, the photo, the sealed confession, his mother's voice, waiting to be unleashed. If this elevator was dragging him to hell, then he'd arrive armed. He wouldn't go quietly, he wouldn't be erased. The elevator slowed, jerking just slightly. before coming to a soft, silent stop. No ding, no welcoming tone, just dead silence. Then the doors slid open. But it wasn't a server room. It wasn't even a floor. It was a hallway, black walls, dim red lights, lined with doors that had no labels. The kind of place built to never be spoken about. Jamal took one step out, and the doors shut behind him. Locked. A voice through the intercom says, "You should have stayed quiet, kid." The hallway beneath the building felt like a memory that refused to fade, the kind that lived in the bones long after the mind tried to forget it. Jamal stood there alone, red emergency lights washing the walls in a color that felt more accusatory than protective. The elevator doors had sealed behind him without ceremony, and for a moment he wondered if this was where stories like his mother's were meant to end, quietly, underground, without witnesses. But then he felt the envelope against his ribs, the faint rustle of paper and plastic grounding him. If this place was designed to erase, then the contents of that envelope were designed to do the opposite. He found a small security desk at the end of the corridor, unmanned, its monitors looping static images of empty rooms. The desk lamp hummed softly, as if embarrassed to exist here. Jamal pulled the envelope free and opened it with hands that no longer shook. Not because he was calm, but because he had crossed the point where fear mattered more than truth. Inside, beneath the letters and the folded list of names, was a slim memory card. No label, no date. Just a tiny square of plastic that felt heavier than it should have. He understood immediately why his mother had sealed it away. This wasn't evidence meant to be skimmed. It was a reckoning. The desk computer was old, but functional. He slid into the chair, the vinyl cold through his clothes, and inserted the card. The screen flickered, then resolved into a grainy video file stamped with a date that made his throat tighten. December 24th, 2005. The time read 10:08. He hesitated for a breath, thinking of the tree they'd decorated when he was a child. The way his mother always went quiet around Christmas. The excuses she'd make to step into another room. Then he clicked play. The footage opened on a ballroom dressed in winter excess. White tablecloths, silver garlands, crystal lights refracting smiles that were practiced and empty. The camera angle was slightly elevated, tucked into a corner, the kind of placement that suggested surveillance rather than celebration. Jamal recognized the room instantly. It was the old executive hall, renovated twice since then but unmistakable in its bones. People drifted in and out of frame, laughing too loudly, holding drinks like props. And there, near the center, stood his mother. Regina Horton was younger, her hair worn straight and pulled back with care, her posture alert as if she understood the cost of being seen. She wore a black dress that fit without flaunting, professional and cautious. Jamal leaned closer, memorizing the way she held herself, the way her smile flickered on and off depending on who approached. This wasn't the mother he remembered only, as tired and ganded. This was a woman navigating a room that had already decided who she was allowed to be. The footage followed her as she moved toward the bar, pausing when a man stepped into her path. Jamal recognized him even before the camera adjusted focus. Garrison Slate, 20 years younger. Hair darker, smile broader, confidence less controlled but no less dangerous. He leaned in too close, said something that made Regina stiffen. There was no audio, but the language was legible without sound. The tilt of his head, the casual ownership in his stance. She tried to step aside. He blocked her with a hand that landed where it didn't belong. Jamal's jaw clenched, the heat behind his eyes rising. The camera cut to another angle, a jump in the footage suggesting it had been spliced together. Regina was walking away now, faster, her shoulders tight. She entered a side corridor, one that led to conference rooms and offices closed for the night. The camera followed, switching again, this time to a lens that caught the hallway in harsh fluorescent light. Garrison appeared moments later, glancing over his shoulder before following her. Jamal felt the air leave his lungs. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't rumor. This was pursuit. Inside a conference room, the footage grew shakier, as if the camera had been hastily repositioned. Regina stood near the table, her back to it, hands clasped in front of her. Garrison spoke, his mouth moving quickly now, his expression shifting between charm and irritation. She shook her head. He laughed. She tried to step past him. He reached out, grabbed her wrist. The grip was unmistakable. Jamal's chest burned as he watched his mother pull free, her face composed but strained, the way women learn to mask fear with professionalism. Because fear invites punishment. The next cut was abrupt. The room was empty for a second. Then Regina stumbled back into frame, her movements disoriented. She reached for the table, missed, steadied herself against a chair. Garrison wasn't visible now. Jamal leaned forward, heart pounding. As Regina's knees buckled, she sank to the floor, her head lolling to one side. The timestamp jumped forward by 4 minutes. 4 minutes that felt like a deliberate omission. 4 minutes that could hold a lifetime. When the image returned, the camera angle had widened. Regina lay on her side, unmoving, her dress rumpled, her hair loosened. Jamal's breath came shallow as he scanned the frame for signs of help, of interruption, of anything that suggested this moment hadn't been allowed to happen. Instead, a pair of polished shoes entered from the right, followed by another set. 2 men stood over her. One knelt briefly, checking her wrist, not with concern but calculation. The other remained upright, his posture relaxed. It was Garrison Slate. He smiled, not broadly, not theatrically. Just enough to register satisfaction. He said something to the other man. Jamal recognized him now as the one from the photo. The legal mind who had watched from the shadows then and from the party now. They exchanged a look that needed no word. The kneeling man stood. Garrison adjusted his cuff, glanced toward the camera's corner as if aware of it, then turned away. The men exited the room together, leaving Regina on the floor like an afterthought. Jamal's hands curled into fists, nails biting into skin. The footage didn't cut immediately. It lingered, unflinching, as if daring anyone to deny what had just been shown. Then a third figure entered the frame, a woman Jamal recognized from the gray dress and tired eyes of tonight. She rushed to Regina's side, panic etched into her movements. She tried to lift her, failed, then looked toward the door, her face a storm of fear and indecision. The timestamp jumped again. When the image returned, the room was empty. Jamal leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him, his vision blurred not by tears, but by the weight of understanding. The silence of his childhood, the sudden job losses his mother endured, the way references evaporated, the phone calls that never came back, it all aligned now with brutal clarity. This wasn't a single act buried by shame. It was a system that knew how to erase a woman without leaving fingerprints, and it had done so while smiling. He scrubbed a hand over his face and looked back at the screen, rewinding, forcing himself to watch again, slower this time. He noticed details he'd missed, the way the camera angles shifted with intention, the way the timestamp skipped over moments that would require explanation. Someone had curated this footage, not to expose it then, but to preserve it, to keep it for a day like this. For him. A folder icon blinked in the corner of the screen. Jamal clicked it and found additional clips, shorter, fragmented, emails captured on camera. A document being signed under pressure. His mother's handwriting, shaky but resolute, on a complaint form that would later be relabeled unverified. He felt something inside him settle into place. This wasn't just evidence of a crime. It was proof of a conspiracy sustained by silence and rewarded by power. A soft sound broke the stillness. A notification chime from the desk computer, muted but persistent. Jamal's heart jumped as a message window opened on its own, text appearing line by line, as if typed in real time. "We were hoping you'd find that." He stared at the words, then at the reflection of his face in the dark screen. Older than he'd felt an hour ago. "You should understand what you're carrying," the message continued. "Because once you show it, they won't stop at threats." He closed the window without replying and ejected the memory card, slipping it back into the envelope with a care that bordered on reverence. He stood, steady now, the fear transformed into something harder, sharper. The hallway lights hummed as if aware of the shift. Jamal took one last look at the paused frame on the screen. The moment frozen where history had tried to pass itself off as an accident. In the background of the image, barely visible but unmistakable, Garrison Slate's younger face hovered over Regina's limp body, smiling as if the world had just confirmed his invincibility. The desk monitor flickered. Footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor, and Jamal realized the past wasn't done with him yet. The soft echo of approaching footsteps tightened the air around Jamal like a noose. Still standing at the security desk in the forgotten hallway beneath Wexley Tower, he slipped the memory card back into the inner pocket of his jacket and closed the folder window, his eyes scanning for the source of the sound. The corridor outside the server room remained dimly lit, its silence interrupted only by the slow hum of electricity and his own heartbeat. Whoever had typed that message, "We were hoping you'd find that," was still watching, or worse, walking toward him now. He didn't wait to confirm. With silent urgency, Jamal pulled the laptop's power cord from the wall, wiped the keyboard with his sleeve to remove prints, and wheeled his cleaning cart away from the desk. The wheels moved too loudly for comfort on the polished floors, but there was no turning back. The elevator to the upper floors remained dead, probably still locked under override, so he moved toward the service stairs, slipping through the door before the steps behind him got any closer. Each flight of stairs he climbed felt like wading against a current of buried truths and growing danger. Every level above the basement reintroduced him to the surface world. Brighter lights, cleaner floors, empty break rooms with flickering monitors. But Jamal's mind wasn't on appearances anymore. It was on power, and how much of it hid behind the illusion of civility. By the time he reached the 27th floor, his body burned with exhaustion, but his purpose only sharpened. The surveillance footage was secured, and now he had one final goal before everything unraveled: expose them using their own arrogance. These men had spoken freely behind closed doors for decades, never once considering that the janitor cleaning their floors might be listening. Not just listening, but recording. That invisibility was his greatest weapon now. Jamal entered the executive cleaning closet on 27 and locked the door behind him. Inside, among the stacks of microfiber towels and bulk hand soap, was a bag he had tucked away days ago. A cheap pen camera purchased online under an alias. He clipped it to his shirt pocket beneath his ID badge, the lens angled slightly upward. Next, he inserted a voice recorder beneath the collar of his jacket and synced it to the Bluetooth in his phone. The device had already been tested on a prior shift. The playback was crystal clear. He emerged minutes later, pushing the same cart but carrying a different energy. Jamal no longer moved like someone cleaning messes. He moved like someone building a case. The boardroom on 30 was active tonight, unusually so for the holiday week. Several directors had flown in for what was publicly described as a strategic meeting, but Jamal knew the truth. It was a damage control session. Word of the surveillance breach had traveled faster than expected, and with the company's stock price vulnerable and a state-level political campaign on the line, silence was no longer the strategy. They were scrambling. From behind the frosted glass doors, voices rose and fell, confident, aggressive, but unafraid. Jamal rolled his cart past the entrance, pretending to mop the baseboards, pausing when he reached the junction near the side conference room. He knew the room's acoustics from years of cleaning it. Sound bled through the air vent that connected it to the main boardroom. Perfect for eavesdropping. Even better for capturing unfiltered racism. As he worked, the first clear voice emerged from the vent. "We can't let this spiral. The Horton file should have been purged with the others. If the footage surfaces," another voice, sharper, interrupted, "then we deny everything. It's her word against ours, and she's dead. The kid doesn't have standing. He's a janitor, not a whistleblower." Jamal's jaw tightened. The words weren't shocking, but hearing them confirmed every silent truth his mother had carried alone. They hadn't just covered it up. They still believed they had the right to define who deserved justice. The voice continued. "And if he makes noise, we hit him with misconduct, theft, behavioral issues. We'll plant a few things if we have to. It's clean. HR's already drafting a narrative." A third voice, more measured. "Let's not overplay our hand. If we fire him too soon, it looks retaliatory. Let him spiral first. Get emotional. We'll stage a confrontation. Make him look unstable." Jamal's hands gripped the cart. These weren't just strategies. These were orchestrated betrayals. The same playbook used on his mother, updated for the social media era. This wasn't justice failing. This was power adapting. He leaned closer to the vent as someone mentioned his name again. Jamal Horton doesn't understand the game he's playing. He thinks this is about justice. It's about control. And control doesn't apologize. It erases. Another voice laughed. "He'll fold. They always do when the lights hit them. Black anger only works on Twitter, not in court." Jamal felt that one in his chest like a blow. The room exploded into muffled agreement. Glasses clinking. The casual dehumanization landed with a familiarity he'd lived with his entire adult life. He wanted to kick the door in, wanted to confront them with the footage, the envelope, the names, but he knew that wouldn't work. Not yet. These men didn't fear confrontation. They feared exposure. The slow, irreversible kind that spread without permission. He backed away from the vent, satisfied. The recorder had captured enough. He returned to the janitor's room and uploaded the audio to an encrypted folder. Every clip, every timestamp, every racial slur, backed up and mirrored to 4 different accounts. But as he stepped out of the room to continue his rounds, something shifted. The hallway, once quiet, now had a presence, the kind you feel before you see it. From around the corner emerged board member Jonathan Bryce, a man Jamal had only seen in glimpses before, always distant, always dressed like the boardroom belonged to him. But this time, Bryce walked directly toward him, not with confusion but with certainty. His smile was thin, controlled. "Jamal," he said, with a tone too casual to be accidental. "Got a minute?" Jamal paused, cart between them. "Of course, sir." Bryce stepped closer, not threatening, just close enough. "You've been working a lot of nights lately, asking around, spending time in places you don't usually clean." Jamal held his gaze. "Just covering where I'm needed." Bryce nodded slowly. "That's good. Shows initiative. But see, there's a thing about initiative. Sometimes it steps into spaces where it doesn't belong." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jamal didn't respond. Bryce leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "We all appreciate your commitment, but Wexley runs on discretion, on loyalty. People who ask too many questions, well, they tend to find themselves alone when the lights go out." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Is that a warning?" Bryce's smile sharpened. "It's advice. There's still time to walk away." He stepped back, adjusted his cufflinks and turned to leave, but before disappearing around the corner he added, "Next time, maybe don't wear the wire so loud." Jamal froze. One of the board members pulls him aside and says, "You've been asking too many questions." The ceremony was staged to look like gratitude. That was the lie. Gold ribbons wrapped the banisters. A projection screen looped smiling photos from charity galas, and a pianist played soft carols that felt more like background noise than celebration. The atrium filled with employees who had been summoned by email with the promise of holiday recognition, a phrase that sounded generous until Jamal noticed where people stood. White executives clustered near the stage, relaxed and expectant, while black and brown workers gathered closer to the back, some in uniforms, some still wearing coats they hadn't been able to take off before clocking in. The air buzzed with forced cheer, but underneath it was a familiar tension, the kind that comes when a system prepares to remind everyone exactly where they rank. Jamal pushed his cart to the perimeter and stopped, hands folded, eyes forward. After Jonathan Bryce's warning, every sound felt amplified, every smile calibrated. He could feel the pen camera warm against his chest, and the recorder resting like a second heartbeat beneath his collar. He didn't need to be told this event mattered. He could sense the choreography. Ceremonies weren't neutral. They were rituals. And rituals always taught lessons. Tonight's lesson would be about worth. Garrison Slate took the stage to polite applause, his smile polished and expansive. He spoke of resilience, of another year of excellence, of community and culture, and family, words chosen because they sounded generous without promising anything measurable. Jamal watched the faces in the crowd. Some people nodded automatically, trained to agree. Others watched with guarded eyes, already bracing. Garrison gestured to the screen behind him, which flickered to a list of names under the title Leadership Performance Bonuses. The first name appeared, then the next. Each announcement came with a figure large enough to draw audible murmurs. White faces stepped forward one by one, shaking hands, accepting envelopes thick with checks and applause thick with approval. Garrison praised their vision, their strategic thinking, their fit. Jamal noticed the language, how praise flowed freely when it matched the recipient's reflection, how ease masqueraded as merit. When the list paused, Garrison lifted a hand for silence and smiled wider. "Now," he said, "we believe recognition should reach every corner of the organization." The screen changed. A new heading appeared. Essential contributors. The figures beneath it were smaller, almost apologetic. Names followed. Custodial leads, kitchen staff, night security. The applause thinned, scattered like coins tossed onto a hard surface. A black woman from facilities stepped forward and accepted a gift card. With a polite nod, the amount announced like a footnote. A Latino security guard followed, clapping himself as he returned to the crowd, embarrassment tightening his shoulders. Jamal felt heat creep up his neck. The structure was clear. Elevate first, diminish later, call it balance, gratitude as theater. Garrison continued, voice smooth. "We're proud of our diversity," he said. The words stretched thin. "And we want to show it." He laughed lightly, as if inviting the room to share a private joke. Jamal watched executives exchange glances. He could almost hear the calculus, how much generosity could be displayed without threatening hierarchy. The screen flickered again, this time to a photo montage of janitorial staff at work. Mops, trash bags, gloved hands wiping fingerprints from glass. Jamal recognized himself in one of the shots. Head bowed, face partially obscured. A ripple of chuckles moved through the room, quick and dismissive. Garrison leaned into the microphone. "Without these folks," he said, "the place would fall apart." The phrase landed wrong. Not gratitude. Ownership. Jamal's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight and felt eyes on him. Curious now. Measuring. He had become visible in the worst way. And speaking of essential contributors, Garrison continued, scanning the crowd theatrically. "We have a special acknowledgement tonight." He paused, letting anticipation bloom. "Jamal Horton, would you come up here?" A hush fell. Jamal's name echoed in his chest like a drumbeat. He felt the moment stretch, every second an invitation to humiliation disguised as honor. He stepped forward anyway, because refusing would be interpreted as guilt, because he knew how this worked. As Jamal walked toward the stage, the contrast sharpened, the lights brightened, the smiles widened, the applause rose and fell without warmth. Garrison waited until Jamal stood beside him, then placed a hand on his shoulder, heavy and possessive. "This man," Garrison said, "has been with us for several years. Dependable, quiet, always working when others are celebrating." The word quiet carried its own history. Jamal kept his eyes forward. "We wanted to do something meaningful," Garrison continued, lifting a small envelope between two fingers. "So we've decided to offer Jamal a holiday bonus." The crowd leaned in. Jamal felt a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, or the memory of fairness. It died quickly. Garrison opened the envelope and glanced inside, his smile tightening. $200, he announced, crisp and final. The gasp was involuntary. It rippled through the atrium like a dropped glass. $200, set against six-figure checks handed out minutes earlier, wasn't generosity. It was theater designed to sting. Jamal felt the room's eyes on him, pity from some, discomfort from others, satisfaction from a few. Garrison's hand remained on his shoulder, a reminder of who controlled the narrative. And, Garrison added, as if remembering an afterthought, "We're also pleased to offer Jamal something else." He turned, motioned to a man at the edge of the stage, and accepted a paper. A performance review. Jamal's breath caught. He hadn't been scheduled for one. Garrison unfolded the paper and read aloud. His tone measured. "Concerns have been raised regarding boundaries. Curiosity beyond assigned duties. A lack of focus." Whispers bloomed. Jamal felt the weight of the words settle on him, like dust meant to obscure. This was the pivot, the public reframing of a threat as a problem. "Of course," Garrison continued, "we believe in growth, so this review comes with an improvement plan." He smiled at Jamal, close enough that only Jamal could hear the edge beneath the polish. "Opportunity, if you..." Jamal met his gaze for the first time, steady and unflinching. The room held its breath. "And because we're a family," Garrison said, lifting his voice again, "we expect our family members to respect privacy. Some questions don't need asking." The message was unmistakable. Curiosity equaled misconduct. Truth equaled trouble. Jamal felt the recorder capture every word, felt the pen camera take in the tableau, the hand on his shoulder, the paper, the crowd's reaction. He thought of his mother signing away her voice for survival. He thought of the memory card. He thought of the underground hallway. Garrison extended the envelope toward him. "Merry Christmas," he said softly. Jamal took it. The paper was light, almost insulting in its emptiness. He turned to leave, but Garrison's voice stopped him. "One more thing," Garrison said, smiling broadly now, enjoying the moment. "Given the concerns, we're reassigning you effective immediately." A murmur rippled. Jamal turned back slowly. "Night sanitation," Garrison clarified. "Lower floors only, and we'll be reviewing your access privileges." The words landed like a verdict. Reduced visibility, reduced access, erasure, dressed up as management. Jamal nodded once. He didn't speak. He stepped off the stage, the envelope still in his hand, and moved back into the crowd. As he passed, he caught fragments of reaction. Someone whispering that it felt wrong. Someone else saying it was necessary. Another laughing under their breath. The ritual had taught its lesson. But as Jamal reached the edge of the atrium, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He didn't look at it yet. He felt the truth settle in him, solid and undeniable. The ceremony hadn't been about rewards. It had been about control. And control, when threatened, always overplayed its hand. Behind him, Garrison basked in applause that sounded thinner now, brittle at the edges. Jamal slipped into the corridor, the noise fading, the envelope still unopened. His phone vibrated again. This time he looked. A message from an unknown number, just 4 words. They're watching the exits. Jamal stopped walking. The building hummed around him, bright and indifferent. And for the first time that night, even the guests gasped, not at what had been given, but at what was about to be taken. The message on Jamal's phone pulsed like a warning light. They're watching the exits. His fingers gripped the device tighter, as the polished hallway suddenly felt longer, narrower, like it had been designed not to lead out, but to trap. He looked over his shoulder, but the corridor behind him was still too still. The sound of laughter and scattered applause from the holiday ceremony echoed faintly in the distance. But it didn't belong to him. That room had already closed its doors on him, reassigned, diminished and marked as a problem. That wasn't failure. That was strategy. They wanted to humiliate him, bury him in silence, and push him to walk away on his own terms. But Jamal wasn't leaving through the back door. Not this time. He took a breath and turned toward the elevator. Not the one reserved for cleaning crews, but the executive one. The one labeled board access only. His keycard wouldn't work on its own, but he didn't need it. The pen camera was still on, so was the recorder, and inside his jacket, still zipped tight, was the envelope with the memory card. He pressed the call button and waited, heart pounding in his ears. If they wanted him gone, they'd have to do it with the whole world watching. Upstairs, the boardroom was occupied. Jamal had checked the schedule earlier during his shift. Garrison Slate, Jonathan Bryce, and several senior members were in a confidential operational alignment session, code for a crisis meeting. They were likely planning their next move, oblivious to the fact that the man they were trying to erase was on his way to sit at their table, not as a janitor but as a witness. When the elevator doors opened, Jamal stepped inside and punched in the emergency override code he'd seen used a dozen times, but had never dared touch. The light blinked red, then green. The cab began to rise. As the numbers ticked upward, Jamal thought of his mother, of the expression she wore in the video when she realized no one was coming to help her. He thought of the silence that followed her throughout her life, the quiet pain she never named, and he thought of the moment she sealed the envelope with his name on it, not to break the world, but to make sure it didn't break him. The elevator opened onto the top floor, quiet, understated, and drenched in glass and wood. The boardroom sat at the end of the corridor, door closed, opaque windows frosted. He pushed the cart down the hall like any other night, head slightly bowed. He knew the camera feeds wouldn't question it. Janitors were part of the background, invisible, until they weren't. At the boardroom door, he didn't knock. He simply pushed it open and walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Garrison stood slowly, confusion painted across his face like a mask he hadn't rehearsed. "This room is restricted," he said, tone clipped. Jamal didn't respond. He walked to the end of the table and pulled a small remote from his pocket. With one click, he synced the pen camera to the monitor on the wall, the same one they used for stock charts and political polling. The footage flickered, then filled the screen. It started with a date stamp, December 24th. The room fell silent. The entire board watched as the ghost of their legacy appeared before them. Regina Horton, her voice muted but her discomfort loud, her body language a visual accusation. Then came Garrison's younger self. His smirk, the hand on her wrist, the moment of power casually abused. The timestamp skipped, her limp body on the floor. The smile. Jamal let it play. He didn't flinch. Garrison stepped forward. "Turn that off," he said sharply, voice rising. "You have no authority to—" Jamal cut him off, speaking for the first time. "That's not all." He pulled the memory card from his jacket and laid it on the table. "There's more. Witness statements. A list of people who knew. A sealed envelope that names board members who were aware of what happened and helped cover it." Jonathan Bryce stood now too, his face less surprised, more calculated. "This is an HR matter," he said, "and you are well out of line."
Jamal's eyes locked with his. So was firing a pregnant black woman because she said no.
A woman at the far end of the table, someone Jamal hadn't seen speak much, leaned forward. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said, trying to keep her voice measured. "This could collapse the entire board. Our shareholder—" Jamal stepped closer. "Your shareholders invested in a lie that erased my mother, humiliated your employees, and protected predators. But that ends now." He clicked again. The next clip played audio. Voices from the night before. The racism, the strategizing, plant misconduct. Make him spiral. Black anger only works on Twitter. It played clearly. The faces in the room shifted, no longer confident, now scanning each other for cover. The room buzzed with low murmurs. Jamal kept speaking. I have backups, cloud storage, safe hands. If anything happens to me, this drops in 10 states before sunrise. Garrison's face tightened. You think this will earn you a promotion? You think blowing up a Fortune 500 company will fix your mother's pain? No, Jamal said calmly. But it'll make sure she wasn't forgotten. That's when the oldest board member, a man with thick glasses and a reputation for silence, finally spoke. He had watched the entire thing without emotion. Now he adjusted his tie and said quietly, "This ends now." The room paused. Everyone turned toward him. Then he looked to the assistant in the corner. "Call ICE." The words dropped like a bomb. Jamal blinked. "What?" "Call immigration," the man repeated, louder. "He has no business being here. Let's see how brave he is in federal custody." Garrison didn't stop him. Bryce didn't flinch. Several board members looked away. Jamal's throat tightened. "I was born here." "Prove it," the man said coldly. "And while you're at it, prove this footage isn't stolen. Prove your mother didn't falsify her complaint. Prove anything, because we have lawyers, Mr. Horton. We have senators on speed dial. You think truth is enough? Truth gets buried every day in rooms like this." The assistant reached for the phone. Jamal stared at the board. His mother's oppressors, now exposed, cornered, but still trying to fight dirty. This wasn't about what they feared. It was about what they couldn't control. But before the assistant could dial, another voice cut through the room. A new one. From behind. Actually, it said, calm and cool, "You'll want to hang up." Everyone turned. A figure stood in the doorway. Someone Jamal hadn't seen since the first surveillance video. The woman from the party. The same one who'd tried to help Regina that night. Only now, she had a briefcase in hand. But one board member coldly says, "This ends now. Call ICE." The sun hadn't yet risen when Jamal unlocked the door to his apartment in the Bronx. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the key, not from fear, but from the aftershock of everything that had unfolded. The boardroom confrontation still echoed inside him like a storm that hadn't quite passed. The footage was now out in the open. The names had been spoken, the silence had been broken, but in his gut, he knew the system didn't lose battles quietly. When power was exposed, it retaliated, not with noise, with precision, quiet destruction disguised as routine. He stepped inside and was met with stillness. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender detergent, the kind he used to clean the floor every Sunday, the one chore that made him feel closest to his mother. A small fake Christmas tree still blinked in the corner, flickering its quiet light over the worn-out couch where his daughter had fallen asleep days earlier, waiting for him to come home from a double shift. She wasn't here now, she'd been staying with her aunt until this all blew over. But something in the air felt wrong. Jamal closed the door slowly behind him. Then he noticed it. The latch on the kitchen cabinet was broken. A drawer was half open. The light in the bedroom, one he never left on, was glowing faintly. He moved carefully, scanning each room. No sign of forced entry. But everything had been touched. Dresser drawers emptied, closet doors opened, and left ajar. The file cabinet where he kept bills and personal documents slightly pulled from the wall. Panic didn't rise. It settled. Heavy. Familiar. This wasn't a robbery. There was no mess, no damage, no stolen TV or electronics. It was surgical. Professional. A mess. He reached for the small wooden box under his bed. The one that held his mother's photo, her last check stub, and a few of her handwritten letters. The box was still there. But when he opened it, the photo was torn, not completely. Just down the center. A precise line that split her face in two. Jamal stared at it. Breath shallow. They knew where he lived. They had come through when he wasn't home. Entered. Searched. Chosen what to touch, and what to leave. And now they had taken something that couldn't be replaced. The comfort of memory. He sat on the edge of his bed and pressed his palms against his eyes, forcing the ache back. His mother had always warned him. Not in words, but in glances. In the way she locked up twice before leaving. In the way her voice dropped whenever she talked about bosses. They never forgive us for speaking when we weren't invited. Now he understood. He had broken a rule that wasn't written, but enforced like gospel. Stay small, stay invisible, and maybe they'll leave you alone. The knock at the door came 2 hours later, just as the sky turned from navy to gray. 3 short taps, not urgent, not uncertain. He didn't move. A fourth came, louder this time. He walked to the door, looked through the peephole. A man in a navy blue suit stood outside, holding a thin envelope. No badge, no introduction. Jamal opened the door just wide enough to speak. "Can I help you?" The man didn't answer. He simply extended the envelope. "Mr. Horton, this is for you." Hand-delivered, as instructed. Jamal took it slowly. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, his name typed on the front in all caps. No return address. "Who sent this?" he asked. The man turned without answering, and walked down the hall, disappearing down the stairwell in seconds. Jamal closed the door and stood there for a moment, staring at the envelope, like it might burn him. He peeled it open with deliberate hands, and pulled out a tri-folded document. It was a court summons, filed under Horton v. Wexley Financial Group. Date January. Charges: violation of non-disclosure agreement, breach of confidentiality, theft of company property, intent to distribute false and defamatory materials. Signed by Howard G. Malik, lead counsel, Wexley Financial Group. Jamal's stomach dropped. The name hit harder than the words. Malik was the same man from the photo. The same one standing beside Garrison 2 decades ago. The one who watched his mother collapse and did nothing. The one who smiled when the camera flickered off. They were making it official. This wasn't just a smear campaign. This was an assault disguised as legality. They weren't denying the footage. They were reframing it, twisting it into a crime. He was no longer a whistleblower. He was now a thief, a defamer, an employee violating policy, and they were betting that their resources, their reach, and their polished lawyers could outlast his resolve. Jamal sat down at the kitchen table, the summons in one hand, his mother's torn photo in the other. He should have been broken by now. Should have been curled into silence, but all it did was harden him. He wasn't fighting for a payout or a headline anymore. He was fighting because every tactic they used, every humiliating bonus, every reassignment, every scare visit, proved what they feared most: someone who knew how they worked, and wasn't afraid to do it. He turned the summons over, and scanned the fine print. A line near the bottom read, "This notice constitutes a binding legal response to actions deemed malicious, and is subject to civil and federal escalation. In other words, back down, or we bury you." His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. "They're trying to freeze your account. Pull your money now." Jamal didn't hesitate. He logged into his online banking app. His savings, what little he had managed to set aside, was already in transfer lock. His checking account showed flagged for review. It had begun. He opened another app. His cloud storage. The video files were still there, backed up. Not deleted yet. But he knew the next step. They'd move to shut that down too. He had less than 24 hours before they started erasing him in every way that mattered. Financially, legally, digitally. Not through brute force, through process. He sat at the kitchen table, and looked around. The room was quiet. The radiator clanked like it always did in winter. But something inside the space had shifted. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a staging ground. A place they'd allowed him to live in for as long as he played his role. Jamal stood, walked to the living room, and stared at the blinking lights of the tiny plastic tree. His daughter's drawings were still taped to the wall. "Daddy is brave," one read. Another, "We protect each other." He folded the court summons carefully, and placed it next to her drawings. Then he picked up his phone and began calling every journalist he knew, everyone he'd ever emailed, everyone who had ignored his story before. And this time when they picked up, he didn't just say his name. He said, "I have proof, and I'm done being quiet." A hand-delivered envelope arrives, court summons signed by the same company lawyer who covered up the two. The courthouse steps were slick with early winter frost when Jamal Horton arrived, his breath visible in the air like something he couldn't quite control. Reporters clustered behind barricades, cameras trained like hungry eyes, microphones jabbed forward in anticipation of his first public testimony. Jamal wasn't used to being watched. He was used to being overlooked. But today he carried more than himself. He carried his mother's erased history, a mountain of documented lies, surveillance leaks, and the weight of every black employee who had ever been quietly dismissed, subtly marginalized, or conveniently forgotten. Walking up those stone steps felt like walking into the mouth of something he'd spent a lifetime preparing for without knowing it. Inside, the courtroom was cavernous, towering ceilings, and oak panels that seemed too ornate for the truth about to be revealed within them. On the left sat a row of television crews, their lenses trained on Jamal like vultures, sensing truth and spectacle in the same breath. On the right sat a gallery of onlookers, ordinary citizens, activists, former Wexley employees, and people who simply knew what it was like to be made invisible. The jury box was filled with faces that studied Jamal with a mix of curiosity and caution. At the center, elevated and framed in the blind light of authority, sat Judge Lorraine Vickers, her expression unreadable, her gavel resting like a silent threat. Opposite the witness stand was the legal team, representing Wexley Financial Group. Polished, composed, confident. Among them was Howard G. Malik, the company's lead counsel, the same man whose signature had signed the court summons that had once threatened to bury Jamal. There was Garrison Slate too, seated quietly, as if he believed a courtroom could still be a sanctuary for denial, and scattered among the boardroom former executives were members of the board, arms folded, eyes narrowed, attempting to appear calm as their empire teetered. The trial began with opening statements that felt rehearsed and hollow behind Jamal's conviction. They framed him as a disgruntled employee, an overreaching janitor attempting to exploit circumstances for attention. The lawyers used euphemisms like policy violation and reputational risk, while never once naming the real issue: racial abuse, cover-up, and institutional erasure. But Jamal wasn't there to be softened by rhetoric. He was there to reveal truth in its rawest form. The first witness called was a former Wexley executive who had since resigned under ambiguous circumstances. Her hands shook slightly as she approached the stand. Jamal watched silently from his seat. He didn't need to speak to feel the air shift when she spoke. His mother's name aloud. She told of a culture steeped in denial, of hushed warnings not to rock the boat, of annual party traditions where certain people were never invited, and where complaints were rerouted into silence. It wasn't acknowledged, she said, voice thin but steady. It was ignored. And when my own concerns didn't align with the company's image, I was told I misunderstood the culture. Her testimony cut deeper than any public report could. Jamal felt his heart tighten, not from anger this time, but validation. He watched as jurors scribbled notes, frowning, leaning in. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was evidence living and breathless in the courtroom, proving that what happened to his mother had been part of a pattern, a system. When she concluded with a tear splitting silently down her cheek, the courtroom paused. Words like institutional avoidance and racial bias hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight, visible and unavoidable. Next, the defense brought in HR representatives, those who had once claimed ignorance of any wrongdoing. They were polished and rehearsed, parroting lines about protocols followed, grievances addressed appropriately, and no evidence of systemic discrimination. Their testimonies felt plastic in contrast, familiar theater when truth was being handed a megaphone. But then Jamal's attorney asked the question that reframed their script. Did you ever interview Regina Horton before terminating her employment? The room tilted slightly on its axis. The HR representative faltered. We believed her complaint was unverified at the time, she said. Our decision was made based on available documentation. Available documentation, Jamal's attorney repeated. But the court has seen evidence, footage, files, witness testimony that was deliberately archived away, not for inaction, but for concealment. Why was information about Horton's mother withheld from HR investigations at the time? A flush spread across the HR representative's face. She glanced toward Malik, who remained unfazed, but the jury didn't look unfazed. The tilt of the room's energy changed with something a costume couldn't hide: guilt. Then came the moment everyone waited for: Jamal's own testimony. The gallery leaned forward. Reporters clicked record. The room seemed to breathe differently when he stepped onto the stand. He spoke with calm precision, recounting the moments piece by piece: the discovery of the hidden file, the memory card, the torn photo, the surveillance footage. But he didn't merely recite events. He shared emotion, the loneliness of working while others celebrate, the way his mother's absence always felt like a missing chapter, the sting of seeing executives praise diversity while reducing real black workers to holiday afterthoughts. His words were not explosive. They were sharp, deliberate, and human. At one point he said, "They didn't just erase her from the company. They erased her from history. They built policies around denial and called it neutrality. But a system that silences a black woman and then tries to silence her son, that isn't neutrality. That's racism, dressed in protocol." Some in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced at the screens overhead, replaying memory clips of his mother reaching for dignity in a room that never afforded her any. Then came the defense's cross-examination. Malik stood, his composure like a shield. Mr. Horton, he said, voice calm, you have presented a compelling narrative, but you are asking this court to believe that an entire financial institution conspired to hide the truth for decades, based on a single incident. Isn't that improbable? Jamal's gaze didn't falter. It's not improbable when you understand how power works, he replied. Systems protect themselves by silencing the inconvenient. My mother wasn't an anomaly. She was a threat to their narrative of inclusivity, and silence was their strategy. A murmur rippled among the spectators. The truth shifted from theory to fact in that moment. An emotional confirmation that the courtroom too had long been a place where systems chose whose stories mattered. But then the unexpected twist came from a direction no one saw arriving. A new witness was called, one the defense had quietly placed on standby. The woman in gray, the one who had tried to help Regina Horton, all those years ago, the one who had handed Jamal the sealed envelope. She entered the stand with a reluctant grace, her gaze steady. Her testimony wasn't rehearsed. It carried the weight of memory unfiltered. She didn't mince words. She revealed that before Regina's termination, there had been internal memos, emails between executives and legal counsel, encouraging a swift and quiet resolution, should any complaint arise from the party incident. She testified that those memos had been sequestered in a private server, never logged in official HR systems, meaning her testimony wasn't about emotion, but about the deliberate concealment of evidence. The courtroom leaned in as she added, with a trembling voice, I was young then. I was afraid. I told myself I was protecting my career. But what I was protecting was their silence. Her words echoed in the silence that followed, not merely testimony, but a confession of complicity. And the jury listened, the courtroom listened, and for the first time in decades, the company's carefully constructed facade looked fragile. But just when it seemed like momentum had swung irreversibly in Jamal's favor, when justice felt as close as his mother's face in the memory card footage, Judge Vickers called for order. Her gavel came down like a judge's heartbeat. Firm, final. We have a complication, she said. The courtroom shifted. Not a murmur, not confusion, just the stark procedural blow that made the air change temperature. I have received last-minute evidence. Judge Vickers continued, her tone neutral but her eyes steady. Evidence that may affect the admissibility of key testimony presented thus far. A hush settled, not the silence of anticipation, but the tension of disruption. Jamal felt a tightening in his chest, as attorneys exchanged glances. The defense looked pleased, poised to exploit this gap. Jamal's attorney's face flickered with concern, but not defeat. There was a strategy in that concern. The judge leaned forward. This evidence was submitted under seal by an anonymous party. Neither side has been granted pre-trial access. Under Rule 403, I must review it before we proceed further. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Not in mockery, not in applause, but in that uneasy disbelief that justice could be paused again, even here on a stage so grand. Jamal shifted in his seat, watching as the sealed envelope was brought forward, thick, official, intimidating in its plainness. No handwriting, no hint of origin, just the court's stamp of sealed evidence. Judge Vickers nodded to the bailiff. Please open. The bailiff did, slowly, ceremoniously, and inside was a single document printed on crisp, clean paper. One page. Clear, no watermarks. No ambiguity. The judge read it aloud. It claims that Mr. Horton's actions, specifically the dissemination of surveillance materials, violate federal trade secret law, and that his legal counsel is under investigation for unlawful disclosure of proprietary company systems. A shockwave rippled through the courtroom. Gasps this time weren't polite. They were shocked. The defense smiled. Not victory, but calculation. The judge lowered the paper, eyes sweeping the courtroom. Counsel, she said, addressing both sides, this complicates matters. Very tightly. Jamal swallowed, the room spinning not with fear, but with a deeper realization. They weren't just fighting a company anymore. They were battling a system that would use law as its shield, and interpretation as its weapon. And through the silence, one thought pressed into Jamal's mind like ice. This isn't just about his mother anymore. But the judge slams the gavel and says, we have a complication. The courtroom still hummed with tension when the bailiff closed the sealed envelope and passed it silently to Judge Lorraine Vickers. Jamal Horton sat rigid in his chair, the echo of "we have a complication" still vibrating in the room like a bell toll that refused to fade. Every eye seemed to sharpen at the edges, some with calculation, some with fear. others with the vague curiosity of people who sensed disaster but didn't know whether it would land on them or someone else. He set his jaw and waited, not because he was calm, but because he had nothing left to fear that was worse than silence. The defense counsel sat smug, too comfortable with disruption, as though every obstacle was merely a chance to tighten their grip. Garrison Slate, immaculately composed, folded his hands, eyes narrowed but polite. There was a certain elegance to his posture, the same elegance that had once fooled the world into thinking privilege equated to moral authority. But Jamal saw the cracks. He saw the moments where confidence faltered, where guilt flickered behind a forced grin. Silence did that to people with history on their hands. It made their souls thin. Jamal's attorney whispered something urgently, words that were lost in the vast space between them. Opposing counsel shifted papers, their eyes darting toward the judge, as though the sealed evidence was a bomb they had forgotten to defuse. Jamal didn't watch them. He watched the envelope, the sign of twist and delay, proof that justice was never linear and never clean. Judge Vickers held the document before her like a map of disaster. This claim of a federal trade secret violation, she said, her voice steady, was filed under seal, with no attribution. Counsel, I will need to hear arguments on admissibility. These proceedings will recess momentarily. The gavel came down, not like a heartbeat, but like a shutter slamming on a moment of truth. Silent confusion swept the room. Reporters scribbled in their pads. Jurors exchanged glances that smelled of worry and disbelief. And beneath it all, Jamal felt the weight of every surveillance clip, every testimony, every whispered dismissal he had endured. Here in a courtroom meant to administer justice. Justice itself was under review because power never surrendered gracefully. But then something shifted in the back row of the gallery. People began to rise, one by one, until the room was quietly buzzing with movement. Whispers rose like smoke. The bailiff looked toward the entrance. Someone was coming, not hurriedly, not with urgency, just with the slow, deliberate gait of someone who knew exactly why they were there. Jamal's eyes caught the first flicker of white hair, then a familiar set of shoulders that seemed too familiar to be coincidence. Faces in the gallery parted as she walked forward, tentative, serious, not at all like the timid executive she once was. But when she reached the counsel table, she stood tall, her gaze fixing on the jury with a weight that stole every flicker of distraction in the room. It was Cynthia Marsh, a former executive at Wexley, one of the people who had testified earlier, but not under oath about the decades-old internal memos she had seen, and then ignored. Her testimony had been careful, controlled. But this was something different. This was bearing something that changed the shape of the entire courtroom. She did not approach the stand. Instead, she looked directly at Judge Vickers and spoke clearly, her voice firm but layered with conflicted emotion. Your Honor, she said, I am here to present evidence that was deliberately withheld from both sides. Evidence that directly implicates the board and reinforces everything Mr. Horton has alleged. Gasps scattered through the spectators. Even the defense lawyers blinked, momentarily shaken. Cynthia Marsh, the one who had retreated behind corporate comfort just moments ago, had just crossed a line no one anticipated crossing. Judge Vickers regarded her with measured curiosity. Miss Marsh, she said, are you under oath? Cynthia hesitated, then nodded, her jaw tightening as though recalling something painful. I am prepared to testify. Jamal's attorney stood immediately, eyes bright with sudden opportunity. Your Honor, we would move to hear Miss Marsh's testimony. We believe this evidence was intentionally buried by the defendants and is critical to justice in this case. The judge inclined her head, her expression unreadable. Proceed. Cynthia stepped forward, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. I was complicit, she said, and the words struck like a confession from a pulpit. Not because I believed it was right, but because I feared what would happen to me, my career, my reputation, if I challenged what was occurring inside Wexley. But I can no longer deny the truth. Her eyes met Jamal's for a split second, and in that moment he understood. This was not a performance. This was redemption, or ruin. She continued. In 2005, after the Christmas party incident involving Regina Horton, I was asked to review a set of internal emails between Garrison Slate, Howard Malick, and other board members. I was told these discussions were sensitive, and that no record should ever enter HR files. I signed non-disclosure agreements that were not required by law but enforced by power, by threat and privilege. The courtroom was silent, not the formal hush of waiting, but the quiet that precedes an earthquake. I saw those emails, she said, and I did nothing. I was part of the chain of silence that allowed a woman to be erased from her workplace, from her community, and from history. She reached into her briefcase and placed a thick stack of printed pages before the judge. These are the emails, Your Honor. Every message, every instruction, every directive that was never logged in official records. They confirmed that the company did not merely miss opportunities to investigate. They intentionally buried the truth. The judge's gaze sharpened. Defense lawyers exchanged glances that suggested scrambling strategy. And Jamal felt something swell inside him. Not triumph, but righteous confirmation of everything his mother ever feared. Cynthia continued, now addressing the jury directly. These emails also include discussions about how to handle future allegations involving Regina's son, should they arise. Code phrases manage the narrative, limit exposure, reframe the claimant, all written in board-level communications that were never intended to see daylight. Jamal's heart thudded against his ribs. The air in the courtroom felt electric, as though truth had suddenly become tactile. Reporters leaned forward. Journalists flipped pages in anticipation. The jury absorbed every word like thirsty travelers discovering a river. Then Cynthia did the unthinkable. She spoke a name that made Garrison Slate blanch, not with denial, but with the flicker of real fear. Garrison Slate himself wrote a message stating, if Regina's complaint resurfaces through her son, we suppress first, defend later, and protect reputation at all costs. That came from him. The defense attorney rose immediately, voice trembling with a tone normally reserved for contractual dispute. Not moral catastrophe. Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is prejudicial and outside the scope of previously submitted evidence. But the judge waved him silent. I will hear her out, she said. And Cynthia continued. And there's more, she whispered, the room leaning forward as though they could catch her every syllable, every nuance. The board established an unlisted server, not archived, not accessible through normal channels, to house these emails. Only executive council and selected board members could access it. That server didn't just hide the original incident. It was designed to conceal any future repercussions. It was a legal black box. The murmurs were gone now. The silence was a breath held in collective shock. Jamal realized then that this room was no longer just adjudicating his case. It was unraveling an empire of carefully constructed omissions. Every smiling photo from holiday parties, every PR campaign about inclusivity, every public memo claiming Wexley stood for equality, all of it was now under scrutiny. The foundation was shaking. Then Cynthia turned toward the defense table. Eyes narrowed in a moment of painful clarity. And one more thing, she said, her voice trembling now with the weight of truth and remorse. After the incident, Garrison Slate was advised not to involve law enforcement. Not because this was a civil matter, but because they feared public exposure of the real events. That's why Regina was silenced. Not for policy violation, not for hurting the company's image, but because she threatened power. Gasps filled the room, not polite this time, but visceral shock, disbelief, awakening. Garrison didn't speak. He only lowered his head, his mask slipping for the first time. Malik's fingers tapped on the desk, fast and dry, like the practiced cadence of someone trying to stall an earthquake. And the jury watched, silent and absorbing. Jamal sat still, his breath catching, the weight of decades of truth finally finding daylight in a room designed for official narratives. Then, just when it seemed that the scale might finally tip toward accountability, when the walls of silence were cracking, the judge called for order. Her voice, crisp yet trembling with gravity, fell like an unexpected thunderclap. Counsel, she said, this changes much of what we have considered admissible so far. I will need to review this evidence thoroughly before we proceed. The courtroom braced, but then Judge Vickers looked directly at Garrison Slate, the man whose legacy had once seemed untouchable, and quietly uttered words that froze every heartbeat in the room. You destroyed his mother, and you tried to erase him. The courtroom gasped once more, not for a twist, not for scandal, but for the truth finally spoken aloud in a place built to hide it. The morning the verdict was announced, Manhattan's skyline was lit with a pale winter sun that seemed almost too bright for the mood rolling through the streets. News vans crowded the sidewalks outside the courthouse like swarms of insects drawn to heat, their satellite dishes rising into the cold air like mechanical flowers seeking signal. Reporters with wind-burned faces and coffee-stained notebooks recited the headlines for the early broadcasts. Voices hurried, urgent, as if the very syllables of truth had been dropped into a world unused to hearing them. Jamal Horton's name was on every screen, the forgotten janitor who forced a Fortune 500 company into the light. His transformation from invisible floor cleaner to national symbol of accountability unfolded not in whispers or pixelated posts, but in shimmering, unavoidable clarity. Inside the courthouse, where he and his attorney had gathered with an array of supporters, former co-workers, activists, and everyday citizens who recognized the pain behind his story, the jurors filed in like reluctant emissaries of justice, their faces unreadable but resolute. The prosecutor stood to deliver the verdict with measured fervor, voice firm but tinged with emotion that didn't need to be hidden. Cameras clicked like shutterbugs in a field of flowers. Jamal's attorney's grip tightened ever so slightly against his arm, a small anchor in a tempest that was about to crest. Then came the sentence that turned murmurs into cheers, disbelief into vindication, guilty on all counts that mattered. Every charge that hinged on systemic cover-ups, discrimination, and intentional concealment of evidence was upheld. The courtroom rippled, not with uproar, but with exhalations of relief, so deep they felt like eras ending. For Jamal, relief came in waves that caught him off guard. A geometric rush when the verdict was read, a sharp intake of breath when the plate glass doors opened, and social justice leaders wept quietly at the edges of the crowd. A sudden tremor in his chest when strangers approached him later with tearful thanks for doing what so many felt too powerless to do themselves. Journalists jostled for position as he exited, delivering questions into microphones like salvos. How do you feel? What's next? Does this change America? Each one was another reminder that his truth had become evidence, and evidence had become justice. Outside, the media circled the courthouse steps, a sea of red and blue lights and extended microphones. As Jamal stepped out into the daylight, with his attorney and their small entourage, cheers rose, not chaotic but purposeful, intentional, as if a long-suppressed heartbeat was finally allowed to thrum at full volume. Reporters clamored, shouting questions faster than answers could be formed, but one cameraman in particular stuck close, asking, "Mr. Horton, what do you want every American to remember today?" Jamal paused, the words of his mother echoing somewhere deep inside him. Justice isn't loud, it listens first. When he spoke, it was with a voice that carried both gravity and grace. Truth doesn't belong to the powerful, he said, and it doesn't die in silence. It lives in the people who refuse to let fear decide whose story counts. The world heard that. Instantly, clips of the statement spread from screens on street corners to social feeds in living rooms. Across the country, hashtags bearing his name trended. Journalists repeated his phrase, sometimes as commentary, other times as quiet wonder. For the first time in his life, Jamal felt recognized, not for a job title, not for a uniform, but for courage he hadn't even known he possessed until the world asked him to prove it. When he finally reached the press line, one reporter asked, "Do you feel your mother is watching you today?" The question pierced him, but didn't break him. Instead, he lifted the torn photo of her from his pocket and showed it to the cameras, half of her smile missing, the other half still brave. "She's not just watching," he said, voice steady and clear. "She's here." The cameras didn't fail to capture the moment. The torn photo held up against a backdrop of flashing lights and cheering supporters became an image that grounded the euphoria, in memory, and pain. The two forces now fused into a public reckoning. But justice wasn't easy. The company was ordered to pay restitution, not only monetary, but structural, independent oversight, mandatory anti-bias reforms, and a national scholarship in Regina Horton's name. It was more than recompense. It was a permanent alteration of a system that had canonized privilege and erased vulnerability. Executives long shielded by non-disclosure agreements were deposed on live television, forced to answer questions they once believed buried. Some apologized haltingly, stiffly, but every apology was recorded, archived and dissected in forums once cold to the concept of accountability. The press conference that followed the verdict lasted hours. Jamal answered questions from journalists, activists, students and even former employees who had been forced out years earlier, their testimonies now galvanizing the broader discourse on institutional racism. The names of forgotten workers began surfacing on blogs and comment threads. Their stories, once unheard, now echoed in the public sphere with a power that felt seismic. Jamal listened to these voices, his expression solemn, his posture unwavering. He felt not like someone perched atop a Hollywood stage but like someone carrying a torch through a tunnel that once seemed endless. Later that night, after the lights dimmed and the news crawls finally switched to other headlines, Jamal returned home to an apartment that felt different now. His daughter's drawings still adorned the wall beside the plastic Christmas tree, their crayon strokes glowing in the soft lamplight. He sat at the kitchen table, the torn photo beside him, and allowed the exhaustion he had never allowed himself to feel to wash over him in quiet waves. It had been a day of history, and yet, in that quiet, it felt private and fragile. His phone buzzed, a relentless, insistent vibration that felt out of place in the calm of his living room. He picked it up, expecting messages from well-wishers or reporters asking for encore interviews. Instead, it was a number he didn't recognize. Blocked number. He opened it with a cautious thumb. The message was simple.
There's more.
His eyes narrowed, chest tightening with a strange mixture of dread and curiosity. He had thought the battle was over, that the hum of cameras and the roar of headlines was the climax. But this phrase, "there's more," landed like a question rather than a threat, an invitation rather than a warning. He stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether it was another attempt at intimidation or a clue toward something else entirely. Jamal knew better than to ignore it. He had learned through discovery, through trial, through every closed door and hushed conversation, that truth often came with layers no one wanted to peel back. But this unexplained message suggested one thing with unnerving clarity. The end of one battle was merely the beginning of another. He scrolled to reply, but paused, his breath catching again. Something in the timing of the message, the silence around it, the timing right after the verdict, made him wonder if someone was trying to steer him. Was there more buried in the company's past? More victims? More evidence too heavy for the courtroom, but powerful enough to shatter entire reputations? Or was it a trap laid by someone who still believed silence was power? He thought of his mother, of the long path he had walked, of the way justice had arrived, not from a single room, but through every voice that refused to be quiet any longer. And he realized that the message was not a threat. Not entirely. It was a summons, not to fear but to action. It was a reminder that truth doesn't come in one piece. It comes in layers, and each layer asks something of those brave enough to peel it back. The next message arrived almost instantly. Check your email. His pulse sped. He opened his inbox and saw a new message waiting. No sender name, just the subject. New evidence. Regina Horton. His finger hovered over the screen. The room felt too still, the lamplight too warm, the air too quiet after days of chaos. He thought of the courtroom, the jury, the faces that had witnessed his testimony. He thought of the scholarship in his mother's name, the structural reforms, the journalists who had called him a hero. And yet the message, "there's more," flickered in his mind like a challenge. He opened the email. Inside was a single attachment, a document titled, Regina Horton, Personal Journal Excerpts. Below it was a line of text, stark and unsettling. She kept a record of everything. What she feared most wasn't death. It was being forgotten. Jamal's hands trembled as the file loaded. The first line he saw was not official, not polished, but deeply human. December 23, 2005. They think this is about power. They are wrong. This is about truth. And whatever happens next, I will not be silent. The screen blinked, and the journal opened like a door he had never been allowed to walk through. Until now. His breath caught as he read the second line. They wanted to erase me from the company. They will not erase my son from the story. Jamal leaned back in his chair, the world tilting as if the truth he thought he'd uncovered was only half of a much larger whole. And in the quiet of that unexpected Christmas night, one thought echoed louder than any media headline. The real story had only just begun. Cliffhanger. But as cameras flash, Jamal receives a silent call from a blocked number. It simply says, "There's more." If you believe no one should be silenced just because they were born without power, type yes in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Jamal's place that night? Don't forget to subscribe, not just to follow these stories, but to stand with the truth they reveal. Because the more we speak, the harder it becomes for injustice to hide.